capital advisors and other investors in the region. We currently manage around £177 million on behalf of UK government, private equity funds and individuals. Total portfolio that exceeds 200 companies in a broad variety of sectors. We aren't specialists in any one sector. We consider ourselves specialists in helping early stage companies to grow to a profitable exit, which we've had many over the years. A lot in software, a lot in professional services, a couple in deep tech, and exits to the likes of Samsung and Apple throughout our history. Since April 2021, we have been part of a larger organisation called Future Planet Capital. Future Planet are a global impact investor. Their mandate is to connect the world's biggest investors to the brightest minds addressing the world's biggest problems. This has taken the form of mostly university spin-out work in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal areas of climate change, health, security, and education, which has netted them some very interesting, very well-known companies over the last couple of years, including Vaccitech, who were the people who built the AstraZeneca vaccine back in COVID. Our Birmingham team's a nice small knit group, 7 of us on the investment team, plus Andy in the portfolio. And we currently manage 2 pots of money. First of all is the Midlands Engine Investment Fund, which targets early stage businesses revenue generating in anywhere in the Midlands region. We focus on the West Midlands, so the local enterprise branches of Birmingham outwards. This is a £55 million fund, which since started in 2018 has made investments into 39 different companies in a whole range of sectors. The Midlands Engine overall is a much larger entity, around £400 million, split into debt and equity portions. We manage the growth equity portion on the right. For earlier stage businesses, a company called Mercia manages the proof of concept equity, and the debt financing has been split amongst 5 or 6 different companies, all of which have their own criteria.
Got a quick question, Hugh.
Yep.
We had Lewis Stringer from the British Business Bank talking in the first meeting, workshop that we did a couple of months ago, and he was saying that they are looking to launch some more funds. Specifically, he was talking about some other regions, but will there be more money for the Midlands itself, or will it just be the other regions?
So the Midlands Engine Investment Fund in its current form started in 2018 and officially ends at the end of this year. We are expecting that there will be another version of the Midlands Engine Investment Fund starting in early 2024, which will be investing into the whole regions, the whole Midlands region. They're working their way around the country at the moment, doing these regional development funds. So the Southwest has recently been launched. I think they're doing Scotland and Wales next, followed by the Northern Powerhouse, and then over to the Midlands once again. So yes, there will be plenty more money coming down this way. More recently, Midland was awarded the Mayor of the West Midlands Co-Investment Fund. This is sponsored by the West Midlands Combined Authority and covers the Combined Authority region of Greater Birmingham, the Black Country and Coventry. This fund is targeting slightly different companies, mostly in the West Midlands growth areas of advanced manufacturing, healthcare and creative industries, but we can do any sector from this fund. As a co-investment fund, we are looking to invest pound for pound with other investors. And the only criteria for this fund is that you are based within this region and have £100,000 of revenue in the last 12 months. So today we're going to be talking mostly around how to write an investable business plan. There's plenty of free advice all over the place about how to write a business plan. But when you're pitching to investors, there's a few main things that we tend to look for that it's important that you have included in your pitch. I'm not going to try not to step on Davis's toes as he's coming on to pitch decks in a couple of minutes, but it always helps, I think, to hear it from the reader in this case. So the first thing you need to consider when you're pitching for investment is where on this ladder you are. This is a very simplified visual of the funding landscape in the UK and anywhere in the world, which if you start on the bottom left of this graph, when you're a very small company, you're just starting up, the availability of funds that you have is very small. There's very few investors who are willing to take a chance on an absolute startup with no traction. And so you're primarily focusing on grant funding. Now, you're in a great place if you're looking for grant funding with TBAT. No better.
Nice plug, Hugh. Not as smooth that was smooth.
You're welcome. But there's a limited availability of grants and you can't often get a huge amount of money for free. So which is when you look into the equity markets, the 3 Fs are your first port of call. 3 Fs stands for friends, family and fools. These are the three most likely people to invest into early stage startups. Friends and family back you as an individual, and the fools don't really know what they're doing, so they're willing to part with a bit of cash to gamble it away on your startup. But as you start to get more
Just on that, Hugh,
sophisticated,
is it worth people being a little bit cautious at that level, that they have too many people all chipping in a small amount and then it muddies the water for later on investment, or is that not an important piece?
it can get messy, and it's important to always make sure that you take formal legal advice when you take on any kind of equity investment, no matter how small it is, because what you don't want to do is get to the later stages of this ladder and the legal structure of your company be in a completely wrong place to take a more significant investment. So once you've exhausted your friends and family, chances are you again can't get a huge amount of money from them unless you're very well connected or went to the right kind of school. You're going into what's called the business angel networks. Business angels are normally people who have sold their business. It might have been in a similar sector to what you're doing. But what that means for you and your business is that they not only bring cash and capital, but they bring expertise and knowledge to share with you and mentor you as you grow your business. Beyond angel investors, you get onto institutions, and this is where venture capitalists come in. Midven sits towards the left of the VC bubble here. We're looking at smaller companies than many of our many other VCs, but we still, when you're taking on institutional investment, need to see traction from your business. Now, there's many different ways of defining traction. It might just be revenue, it might be grants, it might be patents, but there needs to be something formal for us to look at when you're taking on the investment. The investments we make at Midven start at around £250,000, and we can go up to £2 million into any one business. There are a multitude of other investors who start at 1 million, start at 5 million in terms of their investment checks. So it's important that you understand and you're talking to the investors at the right stage for your company at any time. But when it comes to talking to investors, what's common amongst all of them is the things that they look for in a business plan. And I'm going to start with a bit of a metaphor. I am not a surfer. Anyone who's seen me swim will know that I'm nowhere near able to be a professional surfer. But I'm very reliably assured there's four main things that you need to be a surfer. Firstly, you need to be a good surfer. You need to have practiced. You need to be able to read the waves. You need to be able to see what's around you and react. Secondly, the wave needs to be right. It needs to be the right height. It needs to be breaking at the right time. It needs to be not crowded with other surfers. And your board needs to be well oiled. It needs to be the right size for you. It needs to be perfect for you and a perfect match for what you're doing. And all those three things need to happen all at the right time. The surfer needs to read the wave at the right time, which needs to be breaking at the right time, and the board needs to be in the right position. And when we're looking at business plans, it's a very similar way that we look at an investable proposition. We need a product which solves a genuine market issue, which is your surfboard. We need a market which is growing and ready for your solution, which is the wave. And we need a team which is able to execute on their business plan with a unique insight into their marketplace, which is your surfer. And all three of those things need to be happening at the right time within the marketplace. So starting off, first of all, with the product. The most important thing to remember with a product is it's very difficult to shoehorn your business into a marketplace which isn't asking for your solution. So the most important factor we're looking for in any product is what's the problem that you solve? And we absolutely love problems which are popular, which affect millions of people worldwide, problems which are growing at maybe 20% to 30% per year. If the problem is urgent and has to be solved right now, or maybe it's just really expensive to solve the problem in its current form with the current solutions. If there's some kind of legal change which has come into place in the marketplace which makes it mandatory to solve the problem you solve, that's a huge tick in the box. And finally, if the problem is faced by people multiple times every day, that really goes a long way to convincing us that the product that you have is a product which will succeed in the marketplace.
That's really interesting, Hugh. I was chatting to a company yesterday, kind of developing what they think is a medical device, and what they've got is a great solution. They've no idea what problem it serves. So I said, coming to us for a grant or to help you get equity, we can't, because if you've got no market slide, you can't work out the return on investment. So what you've got is a solution looking for a problem. You need to be out working on what is the problem, and then you can start looking at the market and the market opportunity and all the rest of it. So
Absolutely.
so they've got a little bit of homework to do.
If you've ever tried to be sold something at your doorstep, you'll understand the being sold the solution to a problem that you don't have. And that's how we have to look at every business plan we see. What is the problem that it solves? Then what is the solution, and what makes it the better solution than anybody else out there? So next up is the market. Now, there are entire teams of accountants and lawyers who look at market sizing and how to estimate how big your market is. There's two main ways that you can do it. The first way, the most common way, but actually the way that we prefer the least, the way that we don't recommend you do it is what's called the top-down approach. This is where you find a research report from Gartner or some other consulting company that says the widget industry is worth X many billions per year, and you're going to get a 1% slice of that. Now, we don't pay much attention to that if it's on a pitch deck that we see. The way that we tend to see much more successful pitch decks come to us is what's called the bottom-up approach. You start by segmenting your market. How many potential users in each segment do you have? You then multiply that by the average revenue per user per year, which gives you your addressable market size. So say there are 100 million potential users in the UK, in Europe, for whatever you do, and you're estimating that they're worth 50 pence each per year to you. That gives you your addressable market of 500 million pounds per year. That's a much more useful market size for us to look at. As a generalist investor, we are not experts in every market that we invest into. So something that we rely on our founders to come to us with is knowledge of their marketplace. What are the trends? What are the opportunities? What are the threats within this marketplace? We rely on our founders to be experts in their chosen field because we can't be experts as a generalist investor. There are specialist investors who only invest into certain sectors, and they will be able to test you and match your knowledge in that marketplace. But if you're not able to tell me facts about your marketplace when you come into a meeting, it's very unlikely I'm going to trust you to be the one executing on your business plan when it comes to the investment.
As part of that, looking at the market, do you also look at cost of acquisition of clients? So
we do. It becomes much more important. Yeah, it becomes much more important in the later stages of your company. When you're freshly starting up, there's not a huge amount of emphasis we can place on internal KPIs like cost of acquisition or lifetime value. It's something that we will look at and something that we will consider, and so it becomes much more important as your company scales. So as well as understanding the threats, opportunities within your marketplace, something we really like to see is why now is the right time for your solution. Now, this guy on the screen here is a guy called Bill Gross. He runs an accelerator in Silicon Valley called the Idea Lab. And when he founded the Idea Lab, he founded it with that name because he thought the most important factor in a startup's success was the idea that the company had. But what he found after going through about 200 high growth companies over a number of years, he noticed that maybe it wasn't the idea that was the most important factor. And so he did some analysis into the companies that had gone through his accelerator. And what he found was that the most important factor in their success wasn't the idea, it wasn't the business model, it wasn't even the team that was executing on the business plan, and it certainly wasn't how much money they'd raised. It was the timing with which they entered the marketplace. And the examples he gave were twofold. One was YouTube. When YouTube first started, it was not the first video sharing platform, so it didn't have the idea. And it actually launched without a way of making money, so it wasn't the business model. But it was the first video sharing platform to launch once more than half the households in the US had the internet, which meant that it has now cemented its place as the #1 video sharing platform in the world. And secondly was Airbnb. When they first started trading, the idea of renting out a room in your house to a complete stranger was completely alien to everybody. Who would do that? But then Airbnb launched a couple of years before the financial crash, and suddenly renting out a room in your house to a total stranger was a very easy way of getting in a few extra $100 every month to your house at the time you needed it most. So in both those examples, the timing with which the companies entered the marketplace was crucial to their success. So how can you demonstrate that now is the right time for your company to succeed? A huge misconception that founders have when they're doing a market analysis is that competition and competitors are a bad thing. Competition is not a bad thing. Competition means that there's a market worth going after. Every company in the world that you can think of has competition. Amazon has competition from other e-commerce sites. Google has competition from other search engines. And even if you're an absolute startup, you have competition from substitute products. Or how else can your customers spend their money if it's not with you? But what we see far too often is a competition analysis that looks something like this, where they've cherry-picked some features, not necessarily focused on the problems they solve or the solutions they have, but given the impression that their solution is far better because of a couple of cherry-picked features. A much better way of examining your competition is using those problems that we liked from earlier. Which problems do you solve better than anybody else in the marketplace? Gives a much more compelling proposition to a potential investor about how you are going to attack your marketplace. And most importantly, how are you different? What makes you in your marketplace special? Business is not a fair game. You will always be able to be bullied by larger companies. As a startup, you're never going to be able to compete or win a battle if your only route to market is through pay-per-click advertising, because there's going to be another company that can afford to pay more. So what about your strategy is different to the rest of the marketplace? I always like to use the example of a film called Moneyball in this section. I only saw it quite recently. I was quite late to that party. It came out a very long time ago, apparently. But if you don't know the story, is Brad Pitt on the left here is the manager of a struggling Major League Baseball team. And every year they get to the same point in the league and get knocked out by a club which can just afford to put heavier hitters on the field. And one season he loses his two heaviest hitters to larger teams who can afford to pay them more. And he sat around with his scouts trying to figure out how to fill these vacancies. And they are looking at doing things exactly the same way that they always did. But he looks at it differently. Even if we could afford to replace those two people, what would that give us? We'd keep getting knocked out at the same point. So he hires Jonah Hill on the right here, who's a statistician, who comes up with a completely brand new way of picking players for your team based on statistics and expected results. Long story short, they win the league that year. And the year after, every other team tries to poach Brad Pitt to come and join their team. But the line that stuck with me through all this was, if we try to play like the Yankees in here, referring to his team selection meeting, we will lose to the Yankees out there, because it is not a fair game. The Yankees can afford to spend so much more than we can. So if our only way of competing is by doing the same thing, we're going to lose. So what do you do differently in your business that means you can compete in a very unfair game of business? That's what we rely on you as the founding team being able to know. Now, founding team should be greater than the sum of its parts. What does each member bring? What does each member balance off each other? Are there any strengths within the team that you have over and above any other competitor in the marketplace? Or are there any weaknesses in your team that following investment you'll be looking to fill, and you might be looking to your investor to help you fill? Self-awareness goes a long way when you're talking to investors. So be aware of what your team can bring and what limitations you have.
And does there need to be a bit of a recognition there, Hugh, that you might have set the company up because it was your brainwave, but actually you need to recognise the fact that once the business starts moving and starts growing, you might not be the best person to actually run the business, and that
Absolutely.
you need to sell that to the investor that you're still going to be there, but you recognise the fact that you need somebody better at business to run it as opposed to just start it.
There is a huge mindset shift between working in your business when you first start out and what the investor is looking for, which is you working on the growth of the business. It's a very different role between being chief of everything when you first start out to just being maybe chief executive officer when you're looking at the strategies for growing the company, not necessarily the operational day-to-day. It's a huge mindset shift that a lot of founders struggle with, but being able to demonstrate that you have considered the succession planning prior to taking on investment can go a long way in your favor.
Got about 5 minutes, Hugh.
Yeah, should be fine. One last thing to really consider when you're taking an equity investment is how the investor is going to make their money. If you take on some debt investment, the debt investor makes their money by charging you interest on the money that you take. Whereas when you take on an equity investor, we subscribe for shares in your company. And the only way we make any money is by selling those shares for more than we bought them for. So again, it comes into your market understanding. How might we exit our position? The most common ways of exit are through a trade sale, where a larger company comes and buys up a smaller company for some reason. Possibly a private equity secondary, where a large private equity firm sees enough profit in your business to come and buy you. Or in a very rare case, you might go public and list on a stock market. Something that I'll always ask founders in the first meeting is, why might an acquirer purchase your business rather than try and compete with you? And coming up with an answer to that early can go a long way towards helping you secure investment. So, and I'm short for time, so I'm only going to touch on valuations because it's often something that founders want to understand better. The first thing to tackle is what happens when you take on equity investment. Something we hear all the time is, I don't want to sell my shares to an investor. But that's not actually how it works when you take on investment. Say you start a company with 1 million shares in issue. An investor comes along and offers you £500,000 for 20% of your business. Now, you don't sell 200,000 of your shares to that investor. The company issues 250,000 brand new shares on top of those that existed and sells them to the investor. £500,000 goes into the company. The investor has their 250,000 shares. The share price has not changed between these two figures, but there are now more shares in issue once the investor has come in. And this is where we define pre-money and post-money valuation. When there are 1 million shares in issue at £2 each, that's a 2 million pre-money valuation. When there's 1.25 million shares in issue, still at £2 each, we have a 2.5 million post-money valuation. And those words get bandied around a lot without people really understanding what they mean. And if you'd like to understand a bit more about this, I'm sure I will at some point be doing another valuations webinar, so please do follow me on LinkedIn to find out when we're doing those.
Yeah, someone's just asked the question, I don't know if you spotted it, a bit about B shares or dividend shares or ordinary shares and A class. And I think that all just that's where your second talk would be most useful, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
because that starts to explain that. So some would have voting rights, some have fixed dividend rights, some have variable dividend rights. It's an absolute muddle, isn't it? And you do need to sort that out.
Absolutely, it can get very complex. For the purpose of this, we're going to focus on the valuation. Now, the average pre-money valuation of a seed stage startup last year was just north of £1 million for their first round. Now, that in itself is a fairly good benchmark of where you could be expecting to go to. And there's a few ways that you can be higher or lower than that point. If you have very sticky users who never leave you, you're growing at 20-30% a month, and you have intellectual property which protects your position within the marketplace, you can go higher than that average. And the same goes if all those things are not true, you might struggle to reach that average valuation. So when it comes to maximizing your chances, the first thing that founders often do is not leave enough time for raising money. It can take between 3 and 4 months once you have found the investor to get from the first meeting to money in your account. And that assumes that the first investor meeting you have turns out to be the person investing. It's always worthwhile leaving yourself at least 6 months to raise money, to give yourself enough of a buffer that you're not running out of cash and desperate for completion by the time it comes. But the most important things to remember once you're in this process is this: we are always looking for companies which are at the intersection between product, market, and team, all happening at the right time in that marketplace. And I'm not going to read these out, but feel free to read these in your own time once the slides get circulated. But I hope that has been useful, and feel free to grab me on LinkedIn, and we will, I'm sure, be doing another webinar at some point. So
we will be, Hugh. Hugh, that was absolutely fantastic. I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, of course.
So for somebody to come to you, you're looking for traction. So they want to see some demonstrable market traction in there. So they have got some level of income. But as a company, are you happy being the lead investor, or would you prefer to be a tag-along investor? And
we are happy to do either. Yeah, we so from the co-investment fund, it could be looked at as quite tricky to always be going in alongside other people. But the way we're looking at it is an opportunity to collaborate with some really value-added partners. So one of the companies we're looking at the moment is in personal care brand, and we're trying to find introductions to L'Oreal Ventures because they have a venture capital arm and could really add some value to that company. So we are happy to lead on rounds. A lot of the ones we've done from the Midlands Engine have been just us in the first instance, because although we're looking for traction in the marketplace, our threshold is a lot lower than most other venture capital firms. So we're often investing at the point where other firms are not willing to take the risk on that company.
Yeah, fantastic. Hugh, as always, it's a pleasure having you on the webinars with us. And Hugh and myself do quite a lot of this. So Midven, Future Planet, they do run an entire investment readiness 2-day workshop, don't you? Typically running out of Birmingham, and if you're able to access the next one, I really recommend you go along there. Again, they have some terrific speakers. It's a chance to network with peers who are also looking for funding, and again, you'll learn an enormous amount of information. So Hugh, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There we go. If you could stop sharing, then we'll get back to Joe, and then I think we're on to Davies. So Davies works both for himself and for a local enterprise partnership down in the Midlands. And Davies did a talk recently, and I was privileged enough to be there, all about how to really get a strong slide deck pulled together. And I thought, if Davies is available, he's the chap I want to do the next little piece. So if you're ready to share your slides, Davies, we can get cracking.
Thank you very much, Sam. Pleasure to be here. Yep, just a minute.
I'm on a spinny chair and I keep spinning. It's like I keep like. By the way, I'm in a hotel room today, folks. I've got a meeting in Swindon, so it's not an artificial background.
It's all right. Great. Can you see my screen? Just gonna.
Okay, so there's a question whilst you're just getting ready. Question on traction by Jolie. Would you consider pre-revenue companies have committed partners, potential clients, but are on free trials to help? I think that's quite a strong proposition. Whether that's strong enough for companies like Hughes to invest, but certainly for grant access and earlier seed stage investors, certainly getting that end user on board who are helping to influence the shape of what it is that you're trying to develop and promote to them and to sell, I think is absolutely essential. And getting those letters of commitment or proof of trials taking place is a really strong signal to investors that you're onto a good thing here. So yeah, any traction on the whole is good traction, even if it is free trials, just to get it out there. Okay, Davies, off you go.
Awesome, Sam. Can you see my screen clearly?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam, and the team for having me, and thank you to everyone that is tuning in today to this session. So I'm going to talk over the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes on how to develop a pitch deck. And essentially, what I'm going to talk you through is a stepwise guide towards developing a compelling pitch deck, a pitch deck that makes an investor want to listen to you or want to have a conversation with you immediately after the pitch. But before we get into that, a little bit of introduction. My name is Davis Okeowo, and I am an entrepreneur. I've always been an entrepreneur all through my career. I've got a number of businesses, and I've got a new startup that is in the works that I'm going to talk about in the end. But also I work as an access to finance professional, where I help entrepreneurs across Birmingham and the West Midlands region raise capital. And in addition to that, I do a lot of startup training, workshops, coaching, mentoring, and things of that nature. The QR code on your screen will take you to my LinkedIn page. Feel free to follow me, connect with me, and ask any questions outside of this session that we're having. So let's get into the conversation. And the part where I would like to begin are the things that I have termed to be the 5 pillars of a successful pitch. Now, the reason why I've called these things the 5 pillars of a successful pitch is because they represent a stepwise process of thinking through the development of a pitch deck. Now, oftentimes, one of the things that I've found out with entrepreneurs is when the idea of developing a pitch deck comes up, what entrepreneurs tend to do, the very first step they tend to take is they go online, and go look for a pitch deck template. Wrong, wrong, wrong. That is not the way to go about it, because you go online and you search Airbnb successful pitch deck or something of that nature that has previous startup have used to raise capital. The thing is, the context is different, the time is different, the business is different, the model is different, the investors are different. Everything about that pitch is different from yours. And so when I started this journey around working in the space of investment readiness and helping entrepreneurs develop pitch decks, one of the questions that I kept asking myself is, how do people go about the process of developing a pitch deck? What should come first, and how should you think about it? Particularly because when you think about what a pitch is and what a pitch deck is meant to accomplish, it's simply meant to accomplish a piece of communication. That's it. You're a startup, you've got a proposition that you think is going to do really well. What you need is support to get your proposition to market. So, for example, you want to raise investment from investors. So what you're trying to do in essence is communicate the importance of your proposition to investors or any particular audience. It's all communication, effective communication. And so the thinking is, if you're going to build a pitch deck, you've got to communicate effectively. And these are the 5 pillars that help you through that process. The first thing you must do, even before you open up a template or open up your PowerPoint or Canva or whatever it is that you use in design, is to ask yourself, who is the audience that I'm going to be doing this pitch to? Who's the audience? And the reason why this is important is because it helps you align the conversations that you're having through your pitch deck to the investors. Because here's what a lot of people do not pay attention to. Communication, effective communication happens when you've been able to align your interests with the interest of the investor, because that is the instance in which they say to themselves, we really like what this person is doing. It makes sense with our ethos and our values and our mission, and we want to participate in this. It is when they see that what you're trying to accomplish aligns with what they're trying to accomplish. When interests are aligned, deals are struck. And so for you as a startup founder, putting a pitch deck together, the very first thing is, who is the audience? And this is the best time to be alive. All of the information that you require to find out about what a person's mission is, what their objective is as an organization, is available online. I mean, Hugh just delivered a session right now. I was telling you, during the market slide, that for them at Midven, they prefer a bottoms-up approach to estimating your market size, not a top-down. That is free information that an investor is giving to you, saying to you, this is what we want. But then, when you don't go through this process of clearly identifying who your audience is and what matters to them, you will end up doing a pitch to Midven and doing a top-down market slide approach, and they're going to say, you know what, this doesn't work for us, and you lose the opportunity. So the importance of knowing really well your audience, doing your research, finding out what matters to them, what are the investment verticals that they invest in, what kind of industries are they particular about, what are the things that get them moving, what are the kind of deals that they've done prior, what other companies are in their portfolio, what is the investment manager saying about himself or herself on the LinkedIn bio. You do this research, it would help you align your pitch effectively. The other thing that then helps you with is, once you know what an investor is looking for, you've done your research, it helps you know how best to approach the conversation and how best to present your business. So for example, there could be, with any given business, there are so many different things that you've got going for you. So you may have a business that, your business lends itself to sustainability. Your business could lend itself to, a very large market segment. It could be that you've developed a unique piece of technology that is really good, or it could be that you've got tremendous traction. There's so many things that you could have going on for you as a business. The question is, of all of those things that you've got going on for you, what matters most to your audience? Because different things matter to different people. And you're always going to have limited time to do your pitch. So if you've got do a pitch in what, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and you don't have time to talk about all the great things that's happening in your business. If you wanted to do that, you're going to have to, push a lot of content within a very short time frame, and you end up rushing and they don't hear what you're saying, hence losing the audience entirely. So you want to understand, who is this audience, what matters to them, and what is it about my business that I need to emphasize to them. Once you then make that decision and you say, you know what, this organization that I'm pitching to, or this investment firm, or this VC, or this angel, they're very particular about, the industry. They're very particular about having a very wide market segment. They're very particular about what? Internationalization. They're very particular about, having a very strong team. You put your best foot forward by selecting slides. Now, over the course of this conversation, I'm going to get into the details of what slides you should have in your deck. But this is a thought process that leads you to making the right slide choices. Because, I've heard, people say things like, your pitch deck should only have 10 slides. Your pitch deck should only have 12 slides. It's not true. It could have 10, it could have 12, it could be 24, it could be 3. It all depends on the context. It all depends on the pillars. It all depends on these 5 pillars that I'm sharing with you. Hence the reason why it is important for you to think through not just the audience. The next one is to think through the story, because once you figured out the audience, you figured out what matters to them, and then you figured out what is it about your business that you want to present, you then need to storify. It is often said, you can go on Google right now and type in, what slide should my pitch deck contain? You're going to find a lot of content, lots of blog posts and articles by this thought leader and that thought leader. There is no consensus, right? However, one of the things that you'll find very commonly is to say, oh, your slide should start with a problem. And that is fine. I have no problem with that. In fact, it's a very good way to start your pitch deck. However, if you are an entrepreneur that is very particular about your process and you've done your research about your audience, starting with the problem might not be the best way to deliver that punch. It might not be the best way to deliver that message in such a way that the investor sits up to listen to you from the word go. It could be that the best way to actually start is to start by talking about the market trends that is shifting consumer behavior in your favor. It could be that the best way to start your pitch actually is to talk about the experience of your team. It could be that the best way to start your pitch is to talk about the background of how you even came about the problem in the first place. And it could be that the best way to start your pitch is to talk about the customer and what their life looks like today. Your story will be tailored if you know the audience you're speaking to. So hence why it's important to figure out the audience first. And once you figure out what you want to say to them, storify that entire sequence. It helps you to define what slide comes first, what slide comes next, what slide follows that, and what slide are you ending with. The story helps you determine the flow. The next thing then, after you've decided on audience and story, is to then ask yourself, what channel am I going to be delivering this pitch deck through? Because there are various channels through which we do pitches. A pitch can be done online for all intents and purposes. This conversation I'm having with you right now on this webinar could be a pitch. So you could deliver a pitch online, you could deliver a pitch in person, you could deliver a pitch via email. The pitch deck that you send through an email is not the same as the pitch deck that you should deliver in a live presentation. The reason is because when you're doing a pitch in a live presentation, like I am doing right now, if you look at the slide on your screen right now and count the number of words, don't count the logo. If you count the number of words, there are only 2 words, but it works because I've complemented it with an image, but more importantly, the deck is coming alongside my voice. My voice is providing context. So I can have this very nice, fancy looking deck passing the message across with only 2 words. If you're sending this deck via an email, if I send this to you as an email, you're not even going to understand what I mean by the slide. It lacks context. So when you're sending your deck via email, it should have a bit more information. It doesn't mean it has to become an epistle. It doesn't mean it has to become, one of those policy papers. No. It just has to have enough content to provide the right context. I say that again because it's very important. It simply needs to have enough content to provide the right context, not the entire story of your life. So understanding the channel through which you're going to be delivering the deck determines how deep you go on each slide. It determines the depth of the content on each slide. Then once you figure out audience and story and channel, the next thing then is to ask yourself, how much time am I going to have for this speech? Or what is the purpose of this speech? So for example, if you've got a pitch for 10 minutes, by all intents and purposes, go ahead and have 24 slides. It's all right, because that's enough time to be able to cover the content of 24 slides. If someone says to you, oh, your pitch deck should only have 12 slides, but all you've got is 2 minutes to do a pitch, well, maybe it's better to have 5. And also the purposes of a pitch differ. So for example, you could be in a session and you meet an investor and they say, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but I'd rather see it on paper. Send me what you've got. That's an introductory pitch, right? It doesn't have to have everything about your business. It just needs to have, the core essentials that helps anybody to make a decision on whether they want to speak to you again or they're not interested in speaking to you again. That's a taster slide. It's an intro slide. And then somebody takes a look at that and says, this is a very interesting proposition. I want to learn more. And then they reach out to you and say, you know what, this is really good, but we want more details. And then in that instance, you might probably be sending your 20-slide deck, which has all your financials and your payroll and all those kind of things, whatever it is that it is required for that particular audience. The time that you have for your pitch or the purpose of the pitch determines the density of your deck. By density, I mean how many slides should you have. So your audience determines what should you be communicating. Your story determines how should you arrange that communication. The channel determines, what is the depth of content on each slide that you're communicating with. The time/the purpose determines how many slides you should have entirely. And then the last but not the least of the 5 pillars is then the design. This is where you can go to town, brand, do whatever you want to do, look for a template, or put that entire content together. Template is not where you start, is where you finish. So those are the 5 pillars of thinking through the design of a pitch deck. So the question then becomes the pitch deck itself. Now that you know how to think about it, right? How do you then approach it in terms of the structure? When you're putting it together, what are the first set of things you should think about? Once you're then putting your pitch deck together, one of the things you need to understand is that the goal of a pitch deck is not to secure investment. Your goal is to secure interest. Yes, I know you're looking for investment. That's the ultimate goal, but your pitch deck is not going to get you there. Your pitch deck alone is not going to get you there. You have limited time, right? And nobody makes an investment decision off the back of a 5-minute pitch. He was here as an investor is going to tell you there's a long due diligence process. There are meetings upon meetings to talk about terms, to talk about, agreements and all sort of different type of things. So the goal of your pitch deck is to secure a meeting. You're not trying to absolutely convince or, people feel like I need to prove something. All you need to do with your deck is to get the person enough information to say, I love this, but, they still are at that point where they're saying, I love this, I need more information. So you want more meetings, right? Because it's in the meetings, that's where the conversations happen. And then after that, you also need to remember to simplify. Simplicity is king. Don't try to crop every single thing about your business into your pitch. You need to keep it simple. Because one of the things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs fail to understand is the fact that when you're doing a pitch, the person that you're pitching to is not necessarily from your industry. They're not an expert in your industry, right? They just need to get it at a basic human level. So keep it simple. The next thing you need to think about then is to make sure that your story is compelling. Your objective is to tell your story in such a way that it aligns your interest, your strategic interest, with the strategic interest of the person that you're pitching to. That's why it's important that you must start with those 5 pillars. Now, having talked about all of that, what then should the general, I can't do a pitch deck session without at least giving you an idea of what the standard flow should look like. And so what I have on the screen, and I'm going to talk in, briefly about each of them, but the order that I have on the screen, the flow that I have on the screen is a standard flow. It's what I call the standard pitch deck flow. And the reason why this works is because it incorporates all the key slides and elements that an investor needs to make an informed decision. That's the reason why these particular headings have been chosen. Now, there are so many more headings that could potentially go into a pitch deck. When you're telling a contextualized story, when you're telling a tailored story where you know the audience and you know the story and all of this kind of things, you can tailor it, you can play around with this order. In fact, there are some slides here that you may choose not to put. There's some other slides that you might include when you are telling a story that is tailored. But let's assume that, you don't even know who this audience is. Someone just says to you, there is this angel investor I met that says they're listening to, pitches for a fintech company. I know you've got a fintech company, send me your deck. Or maybe, there's a competition and they just said, send us a pitch deck. At the very least, this is a standard flow, because this flow says, this is the problem we're solving. This is how we're solving it, how we believe it should be solved. This is the product we have developed to solve it, and these are the customers we're solving it for. This is the size of the market, and these are the other players in that market that are the competition. This is how far we've come since we started. This is the business model we're operating on. This is how much money we think we're going to make in future, and this is the team that is making it happen. In order to achieve our objectives, this is how much we're looking for, and this is why you should invest. That is literally the simple story that this slide tells. So let's go through them one after the other.
Got about 5 minutes.
Yep. I'll cover it in 5 minutes. So you got a problem. Essentially, the point here is go deeper than the surface. So don't just say, the problem we're solving is that, 28% of the UK population is stressed. That's too high level. You've got to talk about your problem in such a way that you're referring to the reasons why the customers are going to choose you, the pain points of the customers. You've got to dig a bit deeper and not just be shallow off the surface. Then you talk about the solution. The solution essentially refers to the core essence that solves the problem. This is not where you talk about your product. This is where you talk about the method, the technology, the system. What is it that you're doing different that solves that problem? The innovation. This is what you just explained. So we're combining artificial intelligence with XYZ in order to create whatever. And then under the product slide, you talk about what is unique, your unique value proposition. We are an X that does Y for Z so that A can happen. Then once you talk about your unique value proposition from the standpoint of what it is, you also need to talk about your products from the standpoint of how it works. Because you need to help your audience that is taking a look at your pitch deck connect the dots. Thereafter, you talk about who your customers are. You talk about, the size of the market. Hugh has talked a bit about this, but a few tips here is you can make your market relative to geography. You can make it relative to the demography that you're serving or the business model that you're operating on. There's so many more things that you could do with your market, right? And then you talk about the competition. When you're doing a competition slide, you don't just want to highlight who is the competitor. You want to highlight what are they good at. What are the gaps that still exist? And what is your competitive advantage? What is it that's going to stand you out from that competition? And then the next slide is your business model. How are we going to make money? What are our unit economics? And then you've got thereafter the traction. How have you validated this proposition? Do you have sales? Do you have letters of interest? Do you have, waiting list? What is it that you have that indicates that people are actually interested in this? Then after traction, you talk about how much money you think you're going to make in future. You put your financials together, particularly in a cash flow statement, because people want to see the impact of their money in your business. And
quick
then
question, quick question.
Yep.
I love cash flow, by the way. I build a lot of models for people. Would in your pitch deck, would you also show, and if we have to sell it, if our cost is 25% more and our sales are 25% less, do you show any flex in the pitch deck, or is that for a later conversation?
For the most part, you need to communicate in your pitch that your financials, because besides your pitch deck, you should have a financials document, that your financials has that sensitivity analysis built in, because that's what we call it in accounting, right? Sensitivity analysis. If we do well, if you do less, well, how is it going to impact? But you most likely are not going to have the time to explore all of those conversations within your pitch, but you would have the time to explore those conversations within your question and answer sessions. So all you've got to do as an entrepreneur is make sure that that sensitivity analysis is built into your financials.
Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. Then when you're talking about the team, please don't tell the entire life story of your team members. Just tell us, who are they and why are they the best people to hold the roles that they hold. So if you're saying somebody is your chief operating officer, tell me that they've got, an operations and management or administrative background or administrative experience or education. That's just an example. Tell me why that team member is relevant for that role, and then talk about how much you're looking for and how you're going to spend it. And please give people a compelling reason to act. Why now? Timing. Hugh talked about timing earlier. Give them the reason why this is why you should invest to us right now. Now, as I wrap up, you can have the best pitch deck in the world, but you're ultimately the pitch. So please make sure that you do your homework, know your business, know yourself, know your numbers. Nobody should know more about your business than you. Secondly, please don't compromise clarity when you're doing your pitch. Don't rush it. Be coherent. Tell a very plain story, right? This will help you balance your passion and conciseness, and also be relatable. It's not about sounding intelligent or using the biggest grammar or the biggest industry jargon that you could use. It's about relating to human beings. If you cannot do your pitch to a 10-year-old and they understand, you probably don't even know your business well enough. And last but not least, practice, practice, practice. Never miss an opportunity to pitch, because the worst that can happen is that you become better at pitching. So that's about it from me. Thank you very much for the gift of your attention. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's my LinkedIn URL there. Like I mentioned at the beginning, currently building an accounting software startup. If you'd like to learn more about that, please scan the QR code and then you can sign up to our waiting list. But if you've got questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Okay. Wow. The absolute whistle-stop tour there, Davies. And the passion that you show about the subject is just fantastic. And I'm sure the audience saw that shining through and thought, wow, this is such an enlightening 25 minutes on how to do a pitch deck. So absolutely brilliant. A couple of questions. If you're sort of getting down to an opportunity to do it to a single investor,
Yep.
would you, and so you research them, you look at some of the previous deals, as you're chatting about why you think it's interesting to them, you might just drop into the conversation. And of course, when you did the deal with so-and-so, we can relate to that because of this, that, and the other. So it's building that empathy, isn't it, as you're going through the pitch deck?
Absolutely. It's a very smart way to think about it, because then that communicates two things to the investors. First, it communicates the fact that they know that you've done your homework. But secondly, it also communicates the fact that you are watching out for their interest even before they do the deal. Because if I'm an investor and you're saying to me, our technology complements, one of the other startups that you've invested in, and just by going to market, they are going to even perform much better.
Yeah.
You're already telling me how my portfolio will be better just because I'm investing in you. It's a smart way to do it.
Yeah. And I think before you might have mentioned, what you might end up with is 50 slides. And actually what you do, you go, actually for this pitch deck, I only want that one, that one, that one, and that one.
Exactly.
And so you're not having to reinvent the wheel all the time. You get that central branding all the same. It all looks smart, because our investors really quite fickle, as in you might have great content, but the branding looks shabby. So they may not look beyond that. They might think, well, if you can't make an effort on the branding, are you going to make the effort on any?
Absolutely. Investors could be very fickle. So just like you said, if you're not making the effort on the branding, if you're not putting your best foot forward while communicating to me, what tells me that you're going to put your best foot forward while communicating to the customers? And what you said earlier is what I always advise founders. Take a block of time, prepare what I call your master deck. This is a deck that has every single slide that you could potentially ever want. If it's 50 slides, so be it. So that every time you want to do any particular, pitch, you just take out what is relevant for that particular pitch.
Yeah. One question there on your kind of notional run through of slides. You didn't really talk about IP.
Yep.
And the question is, do you have to protect the IP when pitching? So my answer would be yes. But how do you build the IP piece into a pitch deck?
So there are two thoughts around that. So number one, when it comes to intellectual property, I will first speak to it from the standpoint of, how much you reveal in your pitch deck. Remember, most investors are not going to sign a non-disclosure, and you don't actually need to explain the secret source of your business in order for somebody to get it. So when you're doing a pitch, I would always advise founders, please put in information there that you wouldn't cringe if somebody is sharing with somebody else, right? Talk about the high level stuff. This is how we make it work. This is the technology. We could have a one-to-one meeting to talk about the details. This is how we make money, high level. But secondly, if you're a business with intellectual property, which is a very valuable piece within your business, please communicate it in your deck, because there are two things that make investors, particularly equity investors, want to invest. It all boils down to one thing: it's scalability. And there are two core things that drive scalability: it's technology and it's intellectual property. So if you've got a unique piece of technology or a unique piece of intellectual property, talk about it at a high level. Don't give us all the details in the deck just to get them interested. Remember, they just need to be interested enough to want a second meeting.
You want that conversation, that next conversation, isn't it? That's the goal.
Yeah, that's the goal. You want the second conversation, because if you don't get that, likelihood is it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, Davies, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. I'm sure you'll be inundated with people connecting with you. Terrifically well done. Thank you.
No worries at all, Sam. Thank you so much.
Okay, folks, we're going to just have I think I haven't got my Joe, could you just pop up the timing slide, please? I think we've got about 10 minutes, so I think if we try and get back for no later than 15:15, so it means we're kind of running a few minutes late, but hopefully we'll be able to pull that back. So if we go for 15:15, that'd be fantastic. Just a quick, no, resume at 2:15, as if by magic. Okay, folks, I'll see you in 8 minutes. Thank you.